In today's video, we're counting down dumb influencers who got mauled by deadly animals. From a manosphere content creator who lost all credit when a bull shark tore through him, to a travel influencer dragged 90 feet with a lion's jaws. But we start where a charity YouTuber built his entire brand on the appearance of generosity, only to step into the one place the locals had been begging him to avoid. It was April 3rd, 2013, along the northern shoreline of Lake Victoria near the Ugandan fishing settlement of Bukakata, and the water that morning sat flat and brown under a white sky, the kind of stillness that locals who had grown up on that lake knew better than to trust. Alexander Jar, 28, from Akron, Ohio, had built a modest but growing online following through what he called charity content, videos in which he handed cash, food, or clothing to visibly impoverished people across developing countries. His following grew modestly across YouTube and Facebook by early 2013, a number climbing steadily as performative generosity attracted wider online audiences. Friends and collaborators described him as promotional by instinct, someone who treated every location as a backdrop and every interaction as footage. This trip to Uganda was his third to sub-Saharan Africa in 2 years. He had arranged through a Kampala-based NGO contact to document supply distributions to fishing families along the shoreline. He traveled with a single camera operator, a 24-year-old Ugandan freelancer named Amos Kibuka, who handled a second handheld unit. Their plan for April 3rd was to film Alexander distributing bags of rice, cooking oil, and children's clothing to Bukakata families before moving further south along the lake. Now, Lake Victoria's shoreline in this region is deceptively gentle. Low reeds, soft mud banks, and shallows that extend roughly 20 feet before dropping into darker, deeper channel. Nile crocodiles have inhabited these waters for millions of years, growing to 16 feet in length and exceeding 1,500 pounds at maturity. Their bite force registers above 5,000 pounds per square inch, the highest measured of any living animal. They are ambush hunters capable of remaining nearly motionless beneath the surface for extended periods, with only their eyes and nostrils visible. The strike, when it comes, moves from stillness to full contact in under a second. Several local fishermen present that morning later told investigators that a large male crocodile had been sighted repeatedly near the reed line closest to the distribution area during the preceding 2 weeks. One fisherman, identified in the police report only as Godfrey M., stated he had warned Alexander and Kibuka directly, pointing toward the waterline and speaking in Luganda. A second bystander confirmed the warning had also been communicated in broken English. According to multiple witnesses, Alexander acknowledged it with a nod but did not move back from the bank. The distribution had been underway for roughly 20 minutes when Alexander decided the framing needed adjustment. He told Kibuka he wanted the lake visible behind the children in the shot, then stepped shin-deep into the shallows, his footing shifting slightly in the soft mud as he angled his body toward the camera, his right arm hanging lower and closer to the waterline, holding his phone out to test the angle. Witnesses said he was looking at his screen, not the water. The crocodile struck within seconds of his entry. Apparently, what Kibuka saw was not the approach, but the immediate aftermath of contact. Alexander's right forearm disappeared into the water. The force of the initial bite rotated his upper body forward and sideways. The crocodile's rotational force carried through his arm during the first full roll before Alexander had time to vocalize. The death roll followed without pause, a violent lateral rotation that multiple witnesses described as happening faster than they could process. The elbow joint gave during that first completed rotation, the ligament and bone structure failing under forces the joint was not built to resist. Alexander was dragged into deeper water within 4 seconds of initial contact. Kibuka ran to the water's edge but did not enter. Several fishermen struck the surface with oar handles from a distance. The water churned for closer to 12 seconds, the foam briefly turning red, then settled completely. Bags of rice and a sealed packet of children's clothing drifted outward from the point of entry. Kibuka called emergency services at approximately 9:14 a.m. The authorities arrived from Masaka 3 hours and 40 minutes later. Divers did not enter the water until a second team arrived the following morning. The body was recovered partially, approximately 590 feet from point of entry. Estimated time of death within 4 to 6 minutes of submersion. Alexander's remains were repatriated to Ohio 9 days later. His channel stayed active for several months before being quietly removed, with no official statement ever posted. The NGO contact issued a brief condolence statement, but made clear they had no involvement in the decision to film near the water. The fishermen of Bukakata did not speak extensively to outside media. In conversations with Ugandan journalists, several described Alexander's visits to their community as disruptive rather than generous, a man who arrived treating their poverty as production value and their warnings as background noise. The lake, they said, had simply done what it always did. It did not ask where a person had come from or what they had intended. As the waters of Lake Victoria swallowed a man whose camera had captured everything but his own arrogance, another man who had built an empire selling the image of control moments before the ocean reminded him he had none. It was July 14th, 2017, and the Indian Ocean off Durban's North Beach was the color of wet concrete. By 8:40 a.m., Brecken Milo was already in the water with a camera crew on shore and a second operator waiting at the break. And within 40 minutes, the surf around him would carry a trail that had nothing to do with the shoot. Brecken was a 29-year-old content creator from Phoenix, Arizona. His content revolved around discipline, financial independence, physical fitness, and what he consistently branded as the architecture of a high-value life. He was not, by any serious measure, a surfer. He had picked it up 18 months earlier as a vehicle for visual content, something that translated well to slow-motion footage and wide coastal backdrops. His team traveled with him regularly, a primary cameraman, a secondary operator for closer angles, and an editor who also handled logistics. The Durban trip was structured around 4 days of beach and lifestyle footage to anchor a broader travel series. Durban's North Beach sits at the southern end of the KwaZulu-Natal coast, a stretch of shoreline that has recorded more shark attacks than almost any comparable region in the world. Bull sharks are the primary concern in these waters. They are not the largest shark species, but they are arguably the most dangerous in nearshore environments. Adults average between 7 and 11 feet in length and can weigh upward of 500 pounds. Their defining characteristic is tolerance for low salinity water, which allows them to penetrate river mouths, harbor channels, and murky coastal surf, exactly the conditions present that morning. Recent rainfall had pushed sediment runoff into the surf zone, cutting underwater visibility to under 3 feet, conditions that routinely elevate attack risk because sharks rely more heavily on pressure and silhouette detection when optical clarity is low. 2 lifeguards on duty made multiple passes along the waterline on foot and by whistle, directing the remaining surfers toward shore. Most complied. Milo's team requested 10 more minutes twice. The requests were denied, and the crew still remained in the water regardless, believing they can get their shots before authorities escalated. The lifeguards documented both exchanges. The water cleared the surfers by approximately 9:05 a.m., except for Milo, who was making a slow paddle run parallel to the break for a wide-angle pass. The shoreside cameraman was framing from a tripod position roughly 240 feet back. And then out of nowhere, Milo's board jolts forward and to the left. He does not fall immediately. The motion resembles a hard collision from below. The nose of the board lifts briefly, his torso drops toward the water, and he stabilizes with both hands gripping the rails. He holds that position for approximately 3 seconds. The operator said that he saw a dark mass passing beneath the surface just before impact, and a visible disturbance behind Milo's trailing leg. The bull shark apparently struck his upper right thigh. A single bite with immediate release, a pattern consistent with an investigatory or reflexive attack rather than sustained predation. The wound it left was not small. Milo attempted to paddle. This is visible to most eyewitnesses. He pushed himself upright on the board and began stroking toward shore with his arms, his lower body dragging low in the water rather than planing. Within seconds, a streak of red extended behind the board, spreading outward and diffusing quickly in the chop. The secondary operator was shouting toward shore, then toward the lifeguard tower. He did not enter deeper water. Witnesses on the beach later described Milo's paddle strokes as becoming asymmetrical quickly, the right side losing coordination before the left, his body listing within roughly 10 seconds of the strike. The bull shark's bite had torn through the lateral femoral region, severing the femoral artery and adjacent vessels. At the rate of hemorrhage, survivability without immediate tourniquet application was narrow. Lifeguards entered the water within approximately 1 minute of the secondary operator's shout. They reached Milo in under 4 minutes. By that point, he was face down alongside his board, tethered to it by the ankle leash, unresponsive. They turned him and began CPR in the shallows. Emergency services arrived at the beach at 9:21 a.m., 16 minutes after the initial strike. Milo was transported to Netcare St. Augustine's Hospital, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. The cause of death was determined to be acute hemorrhagic shock resulting from a single shark bite to the upper right thigh. Partial footage of the attack was handed to investigators and was not publicly released. The secondary camera operator gave a formal statement and did not return to content work afterward. His family in Phoenix issued a brief statement requesting privacy. His mother, in a single comment to a local Arizona news outlet, said he had called home 2 days before the shoot and mentioned the ocean was rougher than he expected. She said he sounded fine. She said she wished someone had just made him come in. Yet even as the waters off Durban swallowed another man who mistook danger for a backdrop, In Alaskan, a different kind of performer was crouching beside a river, whispering to a grizzly sow and her cubs. It was September 14th, 2015, and the sky above Denali National Park hung low and colorless, the kind of overcast that flattens shadows and makes distances hard to judge. A morning that offered no warmth and no warning before it became the last Soren Falk would ever see. Soren was 29, from Asheville, North Carolina, and had built a following of 4,000 subscribers over 3 years. Her content was built around what she called spiritual rewilding, barefoot hiking, extended fasting in remote terrain, and long monologues about humanity's disconnection from the natural world. She rejected conventional outdoor safety protocols openly and often, framing bear spray and guided access as products of collective fear, rather than practical necessity. Her comment sections were full of people who found her approach liberating. Her family, by most accounts, had quietly stopped watching. The Alaska trip had been announced to her audience 2 weeks prior. She described it as a pilgrimage to witness the late salmon run in what she called the last honest wilderness in America. She had filmed 3 videos in the days before the incident, each pushing closer to active bear feeding areas along a tributary of the Teclanica River. The Teclanica drainage in mid-September is a compressed corridor of urgency. Grizzlies feed with brutal efficiency during the salmon run, consuming up to 20,000 calories per day to build fat reserves before denning. Adult females with cubs are the most unpredictable animals in North American wilderness. A sow grizzly weighs between 250 and 450 pounds, runs at 35 miles per hour, and delivers a bite force exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch. When protecting cubs, they do not bluff. Park rangers at a visitor center had issued a formal advisory 3 days earlier, warning hikers of elevated bear activity along the Teclanica corridor and recommending groups of 3 or more, accessible bear spray, and a minimum 300-foot buffer from any bear with cubs. A separate hiker, Dara Wolf, 34, from Missoula, Montana, encountered her that same evening at a backcountry campsite. She later told investigators Soren carried no bear spray, no canister, and stated plainly that bears respond to the energy a person brings into their space. On the morning of September 14th, Dara was positioned roughly 240 feet upstream on elevated ground, using a 400mm zoom lens to photograph the river. She observed Soren crouch near the bank approximately 60 feet from a sow and her 2 cubs feeding on a salmon carcass. She had her camera raised. According to Wolf's statement, the sow raised her head within seconds, ears forward, body rigid. There was no bluff charge. She accelerated immediately, covering the 60-foot distance in just over 1 second. The impact knocked Soren onto her back. Wolf said that she the sow mounting Soren immediately, driving her face first into the gravel with her forelimbs. The first bite was delivered to the upper back of the skull, a crushing, sustained grip. Her arms moved briefly, fingers opening and closing against the riverbank gravel. The sow released and regripped twice within the first 15 seconds, targeting the neck and base of the skull each time. The bear's cubs remained 15 feet behind their mother. The sow's behavior throughout was focused and methodical. She pinned, bit, shook, and pinned again. Soren's movements ceased entirely within approximately 55 seconds of initial contact. The sow gripped her upper torso and dragged her roughly 8 feet off the trail before releasing and standing over the body. When Wolf and 2 other hikers who had heard her shouting began advancing and shouting, the sow moved her cubs back up the riverbank. Wolf used her satellite communicator to contact park dispatch at 9:47 a.m. Rangers reached the location at 11:20 a.m., 1 hour and 33 minutes after the attack. Soren died en route to the hospital. Coroner said that she sustained multiple crushing fractures to the occipital and parietal regions of the skull, consistent with large carnivore bite force. Severe soft tissue destruction to the posterior neck and upper cervical spine. Cause of death listed as craniocerebral trauma with secondary cervical cord transection. Time of death estimated within 2 minutes of initial contact. Rescue teams noted the absence of bear spray and any protective gear, finding only her camera bag crushed under a fallen log. Investigators marked the scene as a textbook example of predictable predator behavior, and in her online communities, her death became a grim punchline. Thousands of comments blaming bad vibes and woo-woo energy for a death that could have been prevented with basic preparation. Her online accounts were taken down later at the request of her family. Denali Rangers used the incident to push for revised backcountry permit requirements in high-activity corridors, a proposal stalled in review for 4 years. The Alaskan wilderness had already shown that no amount of conviction could rewrite a predator's nature. But in Zambia, a man with a live audience and a phone held over the bow of a small boat was about to discover that the same lesson. It was September 4th, 2017, and the Luangwa River moved slow and brown through South Luangwa National Park, Zambia. the kind of afternoon that felt deceptively still before something irreversible happened. Billy Briggs, 34, had spent 3 years building a Facebook following of nearly 2,000 people on a premise that was simple: no editing, no filters, no delay. He went live from places that travel shows sanitized and encouraged his audience to do the same. Based out of Portland, Oregon, Billy had no formal background in journalism or wildlife. He had worked restaurant management before a solo trip to Iceland in 2014 became the start for him. From there, he leaned into it fully. His content spanned Southeast Asia, Central America, and most recently Sub-Saharan Africa. His reputation among collaborators was of someone perpetually calculating the next angle. Fellow creators who had worked with him described him as genuinely curious, but difficult to redirect once he had decided on something. For this Zambia trip, Billy had specifically booked a multi-day boat excursion along the Luangwa River, a carefully chosen route he planned to showcase live for his followers, featuring hippos, what he described in a pre-trip post as perhaps the most underrated and dangerously deceptive animals in all of Africa. What Billy approached as a variable for his broadcast, a chance to create suspense and increase engagement with his audience, was understood quite differently by the other passengers and the boat crew. To them, it represented a compounding risk, a constant reminder that these massive territorial creatures were unpredictable, capable of rapid bursts of speed, and far more lethal than any camera lens could safely capture. The Luangwa in September is reduced to a series of warm, shallow pools connected by sluggish channels, its banks compressed by the dry season, until animals have little choice but to share the same water. Hippopotamus amphibius, common hippos, are the third largest land mammal on Earth, with mature males exceeding 3,000 pounds and capable of running 19 miles per hour on land. In water, they are faster and nearly silent. Their canine tusks can exceed 20 inches, and their jaws exert a force estimated above 1,800 pounds per square inch. Despite being herbivores, hippos are responsible for more human fatalities in Africa than any large land predator. Territorial males are acutely responsive to perceived intrusion, particularly during dry season when resources compress and stress among dominant animals runs high. The boat operator, a man named Evident Fury, who had guided the Luangwa for 11 years, had briefed the group that morning. Keep voices down, remain seated, hold a minimum 130-foot distance from any pod. A second commercial boat carrying 6 tourists from a separate lodge traveled the same stretch, positioned roughly 295 feet behind Billy's vessel. Fury had already repositioned the boat twice in the previous 20 minutes. Once when Billy stood to get a wider frame, once when he began narrating loudly toward the animals. On both occasions, Fury told him directly to sit and lower his voice. Billy acknowledged him both times and complied briefly before returning to the bow. Fury cut the engine to drift closer at Billy's request, citing better light with the afternoon sun behind the pod. This action directly violated commercial wildlife safety regulations, which prohibit approaching within 130 feet of a dominant male, hippo, and would be noted in the formal review. The dominant male had been stationary for several minutes at roughly 100 feet. Then it surfaced again, 40 feet from the bow, closer than Fury had anticipated. Billy leaned forward over the railing, phone extended outward and slightly downward toward the water. The hippo did not vocalize before it moved. Witnesses on the second boat later described it as a sudden displacement of water, a large V-shaped wake that appeared and closed the gap in under 2 seconds. The animal simply rose. The jaws closed across Billy's lower torso as he leaned over the railing. The force was sufficient to lift him partially off the deck before the animal pulled downward and sideways. The lateral thrashing motion, a behavior hippos use to tear and disorient, was clearly visible to all 6 passengers on the second vessel. Fury screamed at his passengers to get down and reverse the engine at full throttle. The live stream continued for approximately 9 seconds after initial contact. The audio captured shouting, a loud impact, and then water rushing over the microphone before the non-waterproof device sank irrecoverably. Fury radioed for emergency assistance at 4:17 p.m. The nearest park ranger station was 14 miles away by water. Due to the shallow channels and low water levels, the current slowed travel. Help arrived at approximately 5:40 p.m. Billy's body was recovered from a shallow bank 1,800 feet downstream at 6:55 p.m. The coroner's report described bilateral crush injuries to the pelvis and lower abdomen consistent with large animal bite force, transection of the descending colon, and catastrophic damage to the lumbar spine. Cause of death was determined as hemorrhagic shock secondary to traumatic evisceration. Time of death was estimated within 4 minutes of initial contact. Fury was cleared of negligence following a formal review, though the inquiry noted the minimum safety distance had been violated at the time of the incident. His license was suspended, 60 days pending procedural review. Billy's family in Portland released a brief statement asking for privacy. Several of his brand partners quietly removed his content from their promotional pages within the week. The river hadn't finished settling when just a year earlier, on the sun-scorched plains of Tsavo, another man had climbed over a fence in the dark with a camera and a need to prove something, and found exactly what he was looking for. It was October 14, 2016, and the outer perimeter of Sentara Bush Lodge in Tsavo, West Kenya, had gone quiet the way bush does when something large is near. The kind of dark past the fence line where acacia scrub becomes a wall, and the things moving through it with confidence are the things that own it. Dario Venn, 29, had built his Instagram account on a single illusion: that he lived closer to danger than his audience ever would. Born in Thessaloniki and raised in Montreal, he held a communications degree and had worked as a marketing associate before staged wilderness photography outpaced his salary. His feed was meticulous: ropes he didn't need, fires built for the frame, water droplets applied to a lens before the shot. Friends said that he was skilled at it, and a full sponsorship from an outdoor gear brand was funding the Kenya trip entirely. The sponsored stay at Sentara was designed to produce a week of content. Dario had been there 4 days shooting everything from sunrise to golden hour. But a friend he was messaging beforehand said that Dario wanted something his audience hadn't seen yet. His phone's notes app, recovered later, contained draft captions referencing a planned nighttime shoot, unfiltered, off-grid language his followers expected at regular intervals. Tsavo West covers roughly 3,500 square miles of thornbush and volcanic rock. Its lions are distinct, maneless or lightly maned males, harder to spot in low light, ambush hunters capable of bursts near 40 miles per hour. Adult males average between 350 and 420 pounds, and their killing method is precise, gripping the neck and head, collapsing the airway through bite pressure rather than a specific PSI measurement. 2 males had been circling the lodge perimeter on both previous nights, and the lodge had logged both sightings. The head ranger had addressed guests at dinner on October 13th, telling everyone to remain inside the fence after dark. Dario was at the table. A senior staff member spoke to him directly the following afternoon, after overhearing him describe the nighttime plan to another guest. The warning was not subtle. Staff instructed the security team to actively monitor him and escort him back inside if he approached the fence again. That same evening, a guard on the northern fence section saw Dario near the barrier around 11:20 p.m. and told him to go back inside. Dario turned and walked toward the main lodge. 20 minutes later, the guard heard the fence being climbed 60 feet south of his post, outside his sight line. According to later investigations, at around 11:40 p.m., Dario cleared the perimeter carrying a tripod and a mirrorless camera fitted with a remote shutter trigger set to interval shooting every 5 seconds. Recovered footage showed him setting up approximately 30 feet outside the barrier, adjusting the angle to place the lodge lights in the background. He knelt in front of the lens, and the camera began firing frames. Authorities said that the camera captured 17 images over the following 90 seconds. In frame 14, a shape appears at the lower left edge of the frame. Frames 15 and 16 show it in motion. Frame 17 is blur. The night guard reported hearing a single cut-off sound at approximately 11:43 p.m. Not a scream, something shorter, the sound of air leaving a body without warning. He radioed it in immediately. A second guard reached the fence within 4 minutes and swept the area with a handheld floodlight. The tripod was still standing. The camera was still running. Drag marks in the dry soil led north into the scrub roughly 90 feet. A ranger with a vehicle and spotlight arrived 11 minutes after the initial radio call. The lion, an adult male estimated at 390 pounds, was crouched over Dario's body at the edge of a dry drainage channel, jaws still gripping the neck. Feeding had begun immediately at the upper torso. A warning shot forced it to move a few yards back, but remained nearby. The abdomen had already been opened, and feeding had begun. It was already clear to all present that Dario could not have survived. The body was motionless under the lion. Blood on the soil and torn clothing confirmed trauma consistent with fatal predation, and the immediate feeding indicated that death had occurred within seconds. Staff radios and eyewitness reports circulated the grim confirmation before any formal medical examination. The coroner's summary detailed that the cause of death was asphyxiation and cervical trauma secondary to large feline predation, trachea crushed at the 3rd and 4th cartilage rings. No evidence of sustained physical struggle. Estimated time from contact to loss of consciousness was under 30 seconds. Significant post-mortem abdominal trauma consistent with feeding behavior. Dario's sponsoring brand issued a brief statement of condolences and quietly removed his tagged content from their feed within 48 hours. His personal account stayed active for a week. His last post, a golden hour image of the lodge fence line, captioned the boundary between comfort and real life, kept collecting comments from followers who did not yet know he was dead. His collaborators took down his channel later. The Kenyan Wildlife Service reviewed the lodge's perimeter protocols and required additional lighting and motion sensors along the fence line. After a confirmed human fatality, authorities ordered the lion destroyed due to public safety concerns rather than relocation. The camera and tripod were returned to Dario's family. According to family representatives, the footage has not been viewed since and was never released to the public.